Alright, team, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake. And what we have today is an interview with co-director Naoki Hamaguchi that he did with PlayStation, where he talks about just kind of the summons as a whole. As usual, we're not here to read the entire interview, but there are a few takeaways I wanted to look at, things that I found pretty interesting, namely the one summon that they wanted to put in the game, but ultimately couldn't. I'll give you a bit of a hint. It's one that I said they should have put in the game. So let's hop right into it. We originally tried a new mechanic where each summon has a personal ATB bar. When the bar filled up, you'd be able to give it a command just as you can for the rest of the characters you control. And that was the problem. While it achieved the goal of collaboration in battle, it made the summon feel like just another member of the party. It didn't change the feel of battles in a meaningful way, and lacked the special feeling you want from summoning something strange and powerful. So we scrapped that system and tried a new approach. This time players had to consume their own ATB to cast to summon special attacks. It still gave a strong sense of fighting together, but it crucially also felt like something different and special. That was when we finally knew we had got it right. I wanted to read that part because I'm a bit confused how us having to use our own ATB gauges as opposed to them having their own bar altogether makes them feel more special. Like, I think it would have been awesome if they had their own bar entirely. And to be honest, when it came to using the summons in the remake, for one, I mostly just used Ifrit through my first playthrough. I don't even know why, it just kind of happened. I only, occasionally would use his special attacks every now and then, especially if the enemy or the character that I was fighting was weak to fire, then yeah, I would. But for the most part, when it came to using summons in the remake, I did like that they were essentially another character that you controlled in a certain way. They were just on the field doing more damage, and obviously doing a big hit of damage whenever they leave the field. I like that about them. I would have much preferred if they had their own ATB gauges altogether. Next up, we get a handful of concept art images for Bahamut during combat, during battle, because they were trying to figure out exactly how the summon should work. They do mention that this iteration of Bahamut did not make it into the final game, but the point of these images is to show you how much effort they put into designing each of the summons. Our ultimate approach was to keep the original silhouettes, but added a lot more detail to them. For example, Ifrit is a fire summon, so he expressed his ferocious brutality through cracks and burning lava and black volcanic rock formations. For Shiva, we changed the original color tones to be cooler and made her look colder by adding a lot of metallic accessories. In addition to depict all the summons as these transcendent supernatural beings in Final Fantasy VII Remake, we used lots of glowing particle and other effects to really capture their unique essence. I'm happy with the final designs, although I do have one minor regret. We actually originally wanted to include Rama as a summon. Fans of the original game will remember him fondly. Unfortunately, we had to give up on the idea for two reasons. Firstly, we thought there would be fans who would like to use Levithan in Mach Reactor 1 like you could in the demo for the original game. Secondly, we also thought that fans would be disappointed if they could not see Bahamut in a Final Fantasy game. I know I would be. So unfortunately, Rama doesn't appear in the game, but he'll definitely be in the running next time we make a decision on what summons to use. So I wanted to talk about this for a few reasons. For one, I thought it was interesting that Rama was considered for the game, because I mentioned that he should have been in this when I talked about the summons kind of as a whole in a separate video, because he would have been more useful than something like Levithan, who we will talk about in just a second. Him being a electric lightning attribute would have been far more useful than something like Leviathan, who they made non-elemental. I know that the water element doesn't really exist, at least for the characters when it comes to the remake, but still, Rama would have been infinitely more useful. But then also I want to talk about this because I thought it was kind of strange that the co-director says that they put Levithan into the game because they thought that some players would want to use him in Mako Reactor 1 because you could in the original demo. What? I don't believe there's a single person out there, yes, I am willing to speak for every single person in the entire world, that wanted them to put Levithan into the first game so that we could use him in Mako Reactor 1. I don't think that crossed a single person's mind. First of all, it's just kind of a dumb reason to include Levithan in the game and also make him non-elemental, as I'm going to keep touching on because I think it's stupid that Levithan is non-elemental. But secondly, it's an entirely impossible scenario outside of chapter select. You don't get Leviathan until way later in the game, until you do a bunch of Chadley's reports. So without chapter select, without beating the game and just going back to chapter 1 to simply use Leviathan in Mach Reactor 1, it's an entirely impossible scenario. And for that being seemingly part of the reason why Rama wasn't included into this game, I think it just adds to it being kind of fucking stupid, if I'm being honest. I would have much rather them save Leviathan for Wutai, because isn't he a part of the Wutai lore? I know you get him in Wutai with Yuffie defeating the final Pagoda God, and you use the Leviathan scales in the cave to get rid of the fire, but I believe he's a part of their culture or something like that. I can't remember exactly. Either way, it just seems like sort of a dumb reason to use Leviathan over Rama. But it is nice to know that they are going to consider Rama whenever they're making summons for probably the next game, which means that Rama will probably be in part 2. And the last part of this interview is them talking about making the summons feel rewarding, and also why VR battles specifically. And what they mean by making the summons feel rewarding is you having to defeat them in battle to earn them, which I think is actually a good thing. It's something that Final Fantasy VIII did with the Guardian Forces. That's something that Final Fantasy X did with some of the Aeons. I like having to defeat them to get them on your team. That's actually interesting. And as for why VR battles specifically, it's pretty obvious. For one, summons within the lore of Final Fantasy VII are contained within materia. You couldn't just find them in the world to fight them and get them on your team. That's just not how it works with the lore established within this world. But also, it was used to pay homage to Crisis Core, where the VR battles were used to train soldiers within that game. So they thought they'd bring it into the remake to kind of pay tribute to that game. Anyways, but dudes, that's pretty much the video. As always, the article, the interview will be linked down in the description below if you want to go check it out for yourself, because we don't ever read over the entire thing. I said my thoughts before in the past a few times about the summons. I've did an entire video about that. They're kind of just hit or miss for me. They're a little bit mixed feelings. It seems weird. Like, the base game has 6 summons, but 3 of them are non-elemental. That seems just kind of strange. And to have it explained by one of the co-directors why certain summons are used and not used just is like, what? What the hell are you talking about? I don't know. Hopefully when it comes to part 2 and beyond, they switch up the summon system a little bit to just kind of make it more interesting. But as always, I pass up to you guys in the comments. What are your thoughts about the summons in Final Fantasy VII Remake? And what are your thoughts on them leaving out Rama for Leviathan, but only specifically for the reason of using Leviathan in Mako Reactor 1? What are your thoughts on that? Either way, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to update more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @DashingDavid, at my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Low Gain or leave it like Cobain.